I have read 29 books in 2024 so far, and these are my top 10. But first, some honorable mentions. Firstly, I want to highlight A Killer and a King by Tom Dumdrill. Now this is a fantasy whodunit murder mystery. It's very short and it's a standalone, and I had a wonderful time with this one. Definitely very underrated. The other honorable mention is Seasons of Albadan by Christopher Warman and Ellen, I've forgotten her last name. It's two authors. It's basically a short story collections, but the 4 stories kind of intertwine, and it's fairy tale inspired, but it's really well done. I absolutely loved it. I can't recommend this one enough. And the third honorable mention is actually a classic, which is Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. Now this novel is only like 60 pages, and I read it with a friend and we had a great time with it. Now this novel is quite bleak because it's about this young gentleman that gets depressed and he starts to feel like he's turning into a cockroach. And we're just following him as he slowly metamorphosizes into this disgusting animal. And Franz Kafka is a genius when it comes to handling themes and writing atmosphere, but it's definitely a bleak read. But without further ado, let's get into the top 10. The first book on my top 10 is probably going to be a surprise for a lot, but that's going to be Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson. Now I'm not sure if I'm running into a bit of a Brandon Sanderson burnout, because I think I read a book by him every 2-3 months now for like 4 or 5 years. And obviously I'm a huge fan of Stormlight Archive. Way of Kings and Word of Radiance are some of the greatest books I have ever read in my life, and Oathbringer was enjoyable, but if I'm being absolutely honest, it was nowhere near as good as the first 2 entries in the novel. I definitely feel like this book was a bit too long, especially the first 700 pages, could maybe have been condensed to maybe 500 pages, and the final act was very good and really enjoyable, and the flashbacks in this novel are incredible. But yeah, I'm getting a bit nervous about reading Rhythm of War because everyone says that is definitely the weakest novel of this one, and this one, while I loved it, it did drag in parts. And on spot number 9 is another Brandon Sanderson novel, which is gonna be Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. Now this has probably become my favorite Sanderson standalone, I think. I just thought the concept here was so brilliant. It's really well paced, it has accessible writing style, and really great characters. Overall, it's just a very enjoyable story. And if you haven't read any Cosmere novels, now I know someone's gonna crucify me for this, but I think that you can start with this novel and you'll probably have a great time. In my opinion, it's not a bad entry point into the Cosmere. Now my only real criticism is that the ending felt quite rushed, and I also felt like thematically, and I can't really mention what I mean here because of spoilers, but thematically I also didn't feel like the ending made much sense. But nonetheless, this was a very riveting read, and I'm really glad I read it. Now I read a lot of books this year, and picking just 10 was tough. Luckily, I found a productivity and organization app that helps me keep track of my life goals and plans easily, which brings me to today's sponsor, xTiles. I mean, if you're like me and you're always aiming to boost your productivity, xTiles is the desktop first app for you. I mean, it transforms your chaotic schedule into well-structured plans with its user-friendly interface and extensive customization options, which is perfect for an avid reader like me that often gets overwhelmed by my reading schedule and having to stay on top of content creation and so on. My favorite thing about xTiles is how easy it is to use. I mean, it literally took me around 5 minutes to understand how the platform works. I mean, I was able to organize and personalize everything I want without any frames or limits. I mean, how amazing is that? Now with xTiles, you can add a personal touch or choose from a wide range of incredible templates to help make the workspace your own. I mean, options include weekly and monthly planners, travel bucket lists, and family and work routines. I mean, the way I see it, this is my space and I can personalize it perfectly to how I like it. So I've organized the books I read and the books I want to read in the near future, and then over here I have an overview of what I'm working on for my YouTube, which I've tailored for my own personal use. I mean, this is a booktuber stream, complete with weekly and monthly planners and a book tracker. And you know the best part? There is a fantastic free version that I'm currently using. So if you want to use xTiles, try it into your browser using the link down below. Now, if you want to see my book list or want to make your own, check out the link in my bio to find my xTile template. On spot number 8, we have a surprise, or at least in my mind it's a surprise, To Ride Hell's Chasm by Jenny Words. Now, I made a full spoiler-free review about this novel, so I would highly recommend checking it out, because I go a bit more in-depth about the prose or the writing style in this novel, because when I say that this novel is challenging to recommend, it is quite challenging to recommend. Now, the story is really enjoyable because it's a kind of like a whodunit murder mystery, but then it also has some horror elements at the end, and it has a lot of really great characters, and it's again a fantasy standalone. But the writing style, it's almost like reading something that was written in the 15th century or something. Jenny Words uses so many words that I didn't even know were English. So it took me around 100 pages to even adjust to the writing style because it's that challenging. But when I got into the groove, I started feeling so incredibly immersed. Now, one thing I have to praise Jenny Words for in this novel is to actually have a writing style that feels like it belongs in a fantasy world that was medieval inspired. You know, a lot of modern fantasy books will often have a kind of writing that feels very, very modern, but then the world will clearly be inspired by, you know, 13th century or 14th century kind of setting. And in my head, that often doesn't make any sense. If a character is set in a modern setting but uses modern swear words, in my mind that kind of breaks the immersion, but that is not the case here. These characters, they talk like they belong in the 15th century or something, so I definitely want to give Jenny Wars high praise for writing this novel, and I'm definitely intrigued to check it out more, but yeah, it's hard to recommend. On spot number 7 is a novel I've been wanting to read for maybe 2-3 years, and I finally got around to it, and I'm so glad I did. We Are the Dead by Mike Shackle. Now, almost everyone I know that has read this say that this is such an underrated grimdark fantasy trilogy, and I totally agree. If you are a fan of grimdark and John Gwynne when it comes to like really fast pacing and accessible writing style, then check out this novel. When I say the pacing is breakneck, I'm not over exaggerating, but it is so good. The characters are brilliant, and we're basically set in this world where this kingdom that thought that they never could be overtaken, basically get overtaken by this religious, horrible group of people, and then we follow these characters as they try to navigate this new horrible reality. And there's so many interesting character dynamics, there's so many horrible but really enjoyable character moments as well, and there's just something about every once in a while to pick up a novel that has like really accessible modern writing style, really fast pace, because I just felt like I read this novel in like a day or two, but I think I actually read it over 5 days, but it just felt so fast. Definitely very, very different from The Right Sarcasm. But yeah, I highly recommend for any grimdark fans. On spot number 6 is I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. Now, I feel like I've talked about this book probably 2-3 times already on my channel, so I'll keep it brief, but I think most of you have probably seen the movie or at least heard about the movie, and this novel here is often talked about as the first zombies novel, and actually when I read this novel I was very surprised. The zombies are actually not zombies, they are vampires. I know, who knew? But the vampires act like zombies, and I think that's the reason why a lot of people say that Richard Matheson, he's the guy that normalized or created zombies. But yeah, this novel is very, very short, and it was so good, so atmospheric. We follow this guy as he believes he's the last human on Earth, surrounded by vampires that just want to eat him. So many themes such as like depression, what's the meaning of life, how do you keep on going living, were analyzed throughout this novel, and I had a wonderful time with it. And it's also so short. I mean, there's no reason why not all of you that watch this video should go out and read this novel. You really, really need to check it out. I think most of you would have a great time with it. And then also there's an adaptation, so you can watch it afterwards. And while the adaptation is quite faithful, there's definitely some pretty significant changes from the book to the movie, especially at the ending. On spot number 5, we have an author that I'm not gonna call a new favorite of mine, even though I've only read 2 books of his, but that's gonna be Stone of Farewell, book 2 in Memory, Sorrow and Thorn, the second book in the trilogy that inspired George R. R. Martin to write A Song of Ice and Fire. Now, I read The Dragonborn Chair either late last year or early this year, and I loved it, and obviously it had to continue with Stone of Farewell. Now, this novel here is just incredible, but again, it can be a bit challenging to recommend because Tad Williams, now I often say Robin Hobb, she takes her time, but Tad Williams, he definitely takes his time with his novels. There are so many pages in here, almost hundreds and hundreds of pages where almost nothing happens, where you just chill with characters or you see the characters travel from one place to the other, but Tad Williams's prose is just so good, and the characters are brilliant, and you just kind of feel like the plot is building slowly towards a big climax. And yeah, Tad Williams is a master of slow burn fantasy, but his writing style is so good that I don't even care. I feel like I can just read hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages that he's written and I'll still enjoy it. He can write an IKEA manual and I'll probably still enjoy it. But yeah, if you hate classic fantasy and if you hate slow paced fantasy, don't pick up the series, but otherwise, especially if you're a fan of Robin Hobb, definitely check out this series. I can't wait for the 3rd book, which is absolutely enormous, but I look forward to it. On spot number 4, we have the conclusion to one of my new all-time favorite series, Speaking Bones by Ken Liu. This is the 4th and last book in the Dandelion Dynasty, and this was an incredible conclusion. Now again, I made a full spoiler-free video about this series where I go into the lore, what the author is trying to accomplish here, who should read this series and who shouldn't, because this is not going to be everyone's cup of tea, but Ken Liu, he has blown my mind with this series. I mean, the Dandelion Dynasty is the definition of someone writing something new in the fantasy genre. This, generally, I can't really compare it to anything, because while the scale is absolutely epic, almost similar to my last one, but not as epic. There are so many incredible characters and character arcs, so many interesting themes. I just love the analysis of how technology can impact a society and the struggles of building a society up from the ground and try to make it fair and stable. Generally, this is one of the greatest works of fantasy I've ever read, and when I was reading this series, I was just thinking, how do you conclude a series like The Dandelions Dynasty, where you have like hundreds of characters, the scale is massive, and we've covered like decades of time, but somehow Ken Liu, he just nails it. So yeah, I loved every single book in the series. Still, I would say The Wall of Storms book 2 is my favorite, but Speaking Bones was a brilliant conclusion, and I really hope more people go and check out Ken Liu, because this series is so criminally underrated. On spot number 3 we have, and again I kinda could have put this one higher, but all the books from now on are 5 stars in my mind. A Fool's Hope by Max Shackle, book 2 in the Last War trilogy. So I just mentioned We Are the Dead, and this book basically took everything that was good with We Are the Dead and just improved upon it. And there's a really interesting twist or world building mechanic in the series that is being introduced in book 2 that I just did not expect. It's almost like Max Shackle introduces a new short story in this novel, but it works so well. I was genuinely so surprised by that twist, but it's now become my favorite thing about this series. So similar to We Are the Dead, this is like fast-paced, ruthless, grimdark, but it has also some really beautiful coming of age stories in here now. So yeah, please everyone check out The Last War, and I can't wait to read book 3. On spot number 2 is a book I genuinely was so surprised by, and it is now one of the most underrated Stephen King novels I've ever read, Needful Things by Stephen King. Now we read this book together for the Viking Book Club on Patreon, and this was one of the books that were randomly put forward and then also randomly picked. And this book is a chunker, around 930 pages. And while I had read 19 Stephen King books prior to this one, I had heard about Needful Things as being a great novel, but I hadn't really heard much about it as being one of the great Stephen King works. But this is now officially Stephen King book number 20 I read, and genuinely I don't understand why this novel isn't mentioned in more like top 5s by more people. King just knows how to write coming of age, he just knows how to write small town America, and there is one scene in this novel on page number 300 which has literally burned into my mind. I won't even tell you what it is because of spoilers, but the way King has been able to write a plot where there's so many moving parts and it all comes together in a horrifying and satisfying climax is genuinely one of the greatest moments I read by King as of now. Now this novel takes place in Castle Rock, and it basically tells the story of this creepy character that comes to the town and opens a shop called Needful Things. Now people can go into the shop and they will get what their hearts desire, but usually it comes at a really significant cost. Absolutely brilliant. Again, it's a standalone, you should check it out. But what has been my favorite read of the year? It is not only my favorite read of the year, it is genuinely one of my favorite books now of all time, and I can't believe I kept postponing this novel, but that is gonna be Hyperion by Dan Simmons. Oh, this novel was so good, and this is a sci-fi. I primarily read fantasy, and this sci-fi novel blew my mind. Now, while this is the first book in a series called Hyperion Cantos, the first novel very much reads like a standalone, and it basically tells the story of a spaceship on the way to Hyperion, and we see loads of different characters on board this ship, and they all know that they are connected somehow, but they're not really sure how they're connected. So they go around in a circle and they start telling their life story and why they are on this spaceship. And these stories is almost like reading a short story collection, and these short stories are so good. And I'm just blown away by Dan Simmons because he just really showcases how versatile he is as an author, because these stories are very different and the characters are just incredible. I think one thing that I've often struggled with sci-fi is that the novels become so concept heavy, but in Hyperion I really feel like the characters are at the forefront, but then there are also some incredibly interesting and fascinating concepts explored as well. And then just the plot structure of these short stories that intertwine. Oh, it's just brilliant. I also just have to mention, I mean, Dan Simmons, he must be a prophet because his take on AI, considering that he read this novel in the 80s, is just mind-boggling. So those are my top 10 books of the year so far, with 3 honorable mentions. Genuinely, when I did this ranking, I kept moving the books back and forth. So if I did this list tomorrow, I would probably maybe put Speaking Bones a bit higher or whatever. But what has been your favorite read of the year? Now, if you want to know what my all-time favorite series are of all time, then check out this video. You're still here and you want more? Well, the good news is that if you want more and you want to support me, then I do have a Patreon. Now, if you didn't know, then I have a Viking book club where every single month we read one book together, and you can be the one that can put the book forward. Last month we read this
this book, and this month we're reading this book. And at the moment we are trialing having Zoom book club discussions after everyone has read the book. So also if you want to discuss a book with me and other like-minded people, then the Patreon is the way to go. Now, in addition to getting your name in my videos, joining the Viking book club, I am also basically spending around 100% of my Patreon income to reinvest back into my channel. Since I launched my Patreon, I have had more than 30 videos professionally edited. And just to give you an example, from September 2023 to March 2024, I have spent more than $1,500 into video editing with the aim to consistently post high quality videos for you to enjoy. It is much appreciated.